Welcome. Thank you guys for coming. I want to talk to you today about a topic that I know all of us love very much, which is software development methodologies. But before I get into that, let me give you a quick intro about, and by the way, if you want to tweet this or check it out online, there's the hashtag Open Development Method or the website, which you can check it out. I'll put these links back online afterwards. Tell you a little bit more about myself. My name is Ahmad Nassri. I'm a developer, technologist, engineer. I lead engineering teams in a number of companies and startups. Currently, I work at a Mashup, which is based out of San Francisco. We build API tools and products. Before that, I used to be at the CBC and SynCaps here in Toronto and a few other companies. I also advise a number of startups and initiatives. And full disclosure, I am on the board of Full Stack Toronto. And thank you guys for coming here. It looks like it's going to be an amazing event. Yeah. All right. So again, a little bit more about myself. I do a lot of stuff and projects in the open source world. I actually run the Tech Masters group, which is the official chat channel of this conference too, if you want to get on there, chat with other technologists. I run an online publication on Medium called RESTful Web, talking about APIs and stuff. And today we're talking about the open development method. And tomorrow I'm doing another presentation about the hacker bio. You should come to that too. It's going to be more fun. Hopefully this will be fun too, but the one tomorrow is also a lot of fun. I have a number of projects online that are open source projects, usually around APIs and tooling. And like I said, I work a lot with events and things in the city, like meetup groups and so on. So I organize a couple of events in the city as well. Again, usually around meetups and development and stuff like that. I love dogs. Dogs are awesome. I want to put more dogs in presentation. This is actually my dog. Her name is Ruby. We call her Ruby the Lion because she's a coward. I just want to share a picture of my dog. That's really the only reason this is on. I love dogs. All right, so let's talk about software development. It's a messy, messy subject. From project management to product management to development and testing and life cycle of software, anything from design and user experience and architecture, it can get really, really, really messy. People tend to have a big, complicated list of tasks and things to go through when they're releasing a project or working on a project, or they tend to have like a formula that they try to follow. And usually we refer to those things as methodologies and or processes that we follow. A couple of famous ones that you probably already know or use already are things like waterfall, Scrum, Agile, lean methodology, or test-driven development. They're all kind of revolving around the same core subject, which is how do we build software and how do we make it more effective and how do we deliver quality products. The thing to remember about these methodologies, though, is that they're all theoretical. At the end of the day, each and every one of those methodologies in their documentation or description of how to use them, they all pretty much say your mileage may vary. So at the end of the day, it's not really about the format or the methodology itself or the manifestos that they all represent or come up with. It's really about helping you do your job better. And that's why they always try to put that asterisk at the end saying your mileage might vary. You might want to do things differently or adjust to your workforce or your team to work better in a certain way that fits you best. But really, at the end of the day, what we all want to do is just get shit done. Whether you're a developer or a designer or a product manager or a business person that you want to sell your product, you just want to get your product done. You just want to build a good product. You want to get quality software, great user experience, and you want to get it done. So it's not so much the focus on the how, but the what that we all want to kind of achieve at the end. So let me tell you a little bit about the company I work for today. And some of these experiences I've lived through other companies as well. But it's more true today at Mashup. Mashup is an API tooling company. We build a lot of API products and services, primarily for API developers and API providers to help you create better API tooling and better API software. Our team is actually, we have a number of cool people around the world. This is a very rare moment where almost all of us were in the same space together, in the same office. Our headquarters is in San Francisco, and we usually fly there a lot, but not all together at the same time. And as you know, I'm here in Toronto, and I live in Toronto. We have a team in London, a couple of guys in Montreal. We had a couple of folks in Paris for a while. Luckily, they're not there now. And we have, and obviously, the headquarters in San Francisco, but we have a lot of people around the world. We even have a team in Ukraine for a while, too. So we're a distributed team, and generally what we do for hiring people, we just look for smart people who are passionate about API and tools as we are, and we just hire those folks. no matter what they are or what they do or where they live. Our clients are developers like us. They're other startups, other companies, and they have high expectations. So our relationship with our clients is a bit of a unique one, but essentially the same relationship that I would apply to any other client is that you work together with your client, not just a sale and a buy relationship. So because our clients are developers like us and engineers like us, we're able to have a more deeper conversation with them. We're able to build the tools that they really want to use and have a simpler kind of sale conversation of explaining to them what we do and why we do it and understand exactly what their needs are. Our team is actually spread across 7 cities. We speak 8 different languages because we all come from different backgrounds and nationalities. And in terms of time zones, because we're spread across so many geographical locations, we have actual 6 time zones to keep track of. So my role as the head of engineering is really, really complicated in trying to get everybody on the same page and making sure that the team is communicating well and have the same workflow and the same kind of target deadlines and schedule. But the reality is, this makes things overly complicated for many reasons beyond just being distributed. If you think about Agile, if you think about Scrum, there's the principle of having daily meetups or daily Scrums or status updates at the end of the day. That works when you're within the same geographical region, even if you're not in the same city. If I'm working with somebody in Montreal and I'm in Toronto, that kind of works. We can still do that. But that goes out the window when you have a 12-hour time difference and the start of your day is the end of somebody else's day. Or vice versa, if the start of their day, you've already finished your work. So having that daily status update doesn't translate well anymore. Especially when we have people from different backgrounds and cultures. English is my second language, it's not my mother tongue, and so is a lot of our team members as well. So a lot of time discussing things online or talking things on Hangouts or Skype or so on, things get lost in translation sometimes. And it's not just because somebody has an accent or has a different understanding or limited vocabulary of the words, but it's the culture too. So the way you would perhaps interact with different teams in different countries or different coworkers may differ from place to place. And you don't have to go far. Just, our neighbors to the south in the US have a different work culture than we have up here in Canada. Subtle differences, but they end up, causing sometimes big issues or complicates your ability to deliver projects and work. So we're trying to overcome all these issues. We tried different methods, Scrum and Agile, Waterfall, pair programming, you name it. But then because it just so happened that many of us contribute to open source projects and are part of the open source world, we kind of found something familiar in the open source model. So if you're not familiar with open source models or how the open source projects get built, not all of them are sponsored by a company like Oracle or Google that they actually have a dedicated team to work on. Many of these projects are built by individuals around the world. And these individuals either work on them in their spare time or their weekends or between projects. And they all kind of work together and collaborate towards an end goal. So having just familiarity with that, I started researching and looking at how these people and how these folks operate and get together to actually deliver these big, massive projects. Think of the Linux project or database projects around the world. Sure, sometimes there are companies sponsoring them and actual dedicated teams working on them, but the reality is the team is actually way more expanded than just the 10, 20 people working on that core of the product. So how do these guys coordinate? How do these guys get things done? How do these things get shipped and built? Considering that there are thousands of cities and languages and nationalities involved in that mix. They don't really have a project manager managing all 500 contributors. They don't really have a product manager planning the roadmap for the next fiscal based on their burn chart. It doesn't really work that way. So there's something different about that. So if you think about it, if you look really deeply into open source projects, there are certain tenets that people follow. And they're not spoken or they're not prescribed. They're kind of an unspoken thing that everybody kind of consolidates on. So generally speaking, these are the 7 tenets that I've noticed are things associated with the open source world and how people deliver and get things done. Number 1 is quality. Whether it's code quality, whether it's design quality, whether it's user experience, whether it's product experience, at the end of the day, everybody's trying to deliver the best quality product that they want to deliver. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Second is documentation. If you're talking about a team that's across languages and across cities and across time zones, you can't just always be there for each other. You can't always jump on a call. And yes, you can schedule it, and yes, you can plan it and have people work in the evenings and daylight. But the reality is people work at different time zones. They need to be able to jump into a project and get things done fast. And the only way you can truly achieve that is to have prescriptive documentation that helps people actually get on and understand what the product is doing or the code is doing. And again, this is not just for code, but for design as well, for user experience, for any teams that distribute it. Having instructions and documentation and information available helps people get started, helps people actually do things faster, rather than relying on others to answer questions for them. Testing. Again, we use the term testing in development a lot. Unit testing, regression testing, software testing. But it's also you're testing user experience designs. You're expecting flows. You're testing the product interactions. There's a lot of testing that happens in building products. And again, that's part of everybody's day-to-day thing anyways. As a designer, you want to test your hypotheses about the design and the kind of the schemes of the colors you're choosing, the user flow and the user experience you're picking. You do that by testing with audiences, by doing focus groups, and so on. As a developer, you write unit tests, you write regression tests, you write a lot of tests. As in a DevOps or an IT organization, you do a lot of systems tests. But that also is true for any open source project. If you are expecting your project to be successful and people to actually adopt it and use it, it needs to have a good coverage of testing. And people, again, take that as a core part of what they do. So every contribution, every pull request that you see in a project is expected to have a test. Otherwise, why should I merge your pull request? Why should I accept this change that you're providing to the project? Same thing with discussion and transparency. They kind of go together hand in hand. If you go to an open source project, there is no boss. There's no development manager. There's no owner. There's no product manager. It's a community of people, and they all work together. Sure, sometimes there might be a leading person as opposed to an owner or a manager. But generally speaking, it's an open discussion. And everybody has the ability to provide value to that discussion by providing their opinions and their ideas and or just their feedback. And the nice thing about the open source world in terms of discussion and transparency is that even if you're not a developer, if you're not a designer or anybody who's actually contributing anything to the project, you're just a user of the product, you actually know where to go to talk to the people that build the product for you. So if you're using an open source mobile app or desktop app or something, you know exactly how to reach the people that built it. As opposed to a lot of commercial products, you have to call a support line or talk to a help desk or something. You don't actually get to talk to the people who build the thing you're using. So there's actually that very short access or short distance of access to people who are actually building the products that anybody can contribute to. And with transparency, you involve people beyond just the product design process, beyond the developers, beyond the designers, beyond the project managers and systems architects. You actually involve the business people too. So they actually get to see exactly what this product is doing, when it's going to deliver, what challenges you're facing, what timelines, restrictions you're playing with, as opposed to just getting a report at the end of the day saying, these are the deadlines, and this is the schedule, and this is the burn rate, and this is what we expect the cost to be. If the business side of the equation is involved with the development from day one, especially in the open source world, you see this example. There's a lot of businesses, a lot of companies that actually are dependent on the open source technologies that are out there. And you don't see CEOs of companies go and demand that an open source project be delivered by a certain time and throw money at the problem and we'll solve it. It just doesn't work that way. They build their business and their business decisions around the schedule of the open source project, not the other way around. So there's something to be kind of considered there, and it may not translate one-to-one for a normal business or a client work. If you're doing agency work, if you're selling products, it may not translate the same way, but involving the business side of the equation and the process of building software is definitely valuable. Asynchronicity, like being asynchronous in general. This especially works if you're distributed, if you have a team around the world, or you have different time zones you have to deal with. This idea that if I need to answer a question, if I'm writing code, or I'm looking at somebody's code, or if I need to validate a UX flow or a design flow, and I need to jump and talk to a developer to validate whether this will work or not, or I need to talk to my product guy to see if this solution matches the user expectation. It works if you're in the same office. You can just walk over to the guy, pick up the phone, call them on their desk, or perhaps wait for the meeting in a couple hours and talk to them. But when you're distributed, you don't have that opportunity. You don't have the opportunity to walk over to the person and talk to them. You don't necessarily have the time as much time to spend with the people. Yeah, I mean, there's the example, you have a daily Scrum, but that's going to be 2 hours, of a window of 2 hours that you can actually talk to people on the other side, but then you're going to sleep and they're starting their day, or it's the other way around. So your time is now compressed all of a sudden. So with the expectation of asynchronicity, you're taking everything else out of this list, good documentation, open discussion, clear tests, and clear definition of what the product needs to do, and the focus on quality. And you're taking all of that into consideration so that when I do have a problem, when I do have a question, with the expectation that the person is not going to be able to immediately answer me, I need to properly document my question. I need to properly test my question, provide the scenarios that I need my question to be answered within. And then when I ask my question to the community or to the rest of my team that's distributed, they can come in and they don't need to ask me questions back to clarify, right? So if you take those considerations into place when you're trying to collaborate with your team members, if you provide all that information up front, it makes it a lot easier to get answers back, rather than saying, hey, I need to figure out what better approach to solve this problem with. Well, what do you mean? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Does this work? Does this not work? That's the conversation we usually have. So if you actually try to eliminate as much of that back and forth as possible up front, it helps you get that better result. And democracy is the most important thing, in my opinion. I have this term for managers and management in general. They're just single points of failure. If your decision-making process involves a manager signing off on things that has not been involved in the rest of the development or the product flow and maybe shows up to a monthly meeting or something, then you have a single point of failure, and that's not good. The people who need to make decisions about a project, no matter what the project is, design or development or product development, they're the people who are actually working on the project. So I should have gone through this list, but I'm going to quickly recap some of the things we talked about. Again, quality. It's not about syntax or code testing or how nice your code is written. It's also about how the product is built, what the experience is, the people who are going to be using your product, whether it's a command line tool or whether it's a mobile application or whether it's a website. Quality covers everything, covers design, covers user experience, covers the development and the technology involved. And really, that quote is something I actually have printed and set up on my desk. As a developer, this actually is a little bit more true. If you're writing code and you're thinking that nobody else has to deal with it, you're wrong. There's going to be the next developer. There's going to be the other team member. And the consequences of your code being not as good of a quality affects everything in the product. So, and that's also true for the user experience design. That's also true for product design. If you think, it doesn't really matter where I put this button, it doesn't really matter where what the color scheme for this website is, that's not the point. It matters. Everything matters. Just as your user experience will affect developers, the same way would the code affect the user experience. It really translates across. Again, with documentation, that's a nice quote I have. It's better than nothing. Yes, people don't like writing documentation. Developers don't necessarily enjoy sitting down and documenting every line of code you're doing. But think of that previous example. If you're that developer inheriting somebody else's code, you want to understand what that code is doing. And the same thing with design. We've actually went through a number of designers in our company. People turn over and go on to new adventures. And with every designer that comes in, the answer ends up being, yeah, we'll just start from scratch. We'll create a new style guide. We'll create everything brand new and start over. It's because things were not documented as clearly and things weren't explained. So, we talk about documentation a lot as developers and technologists, but even on product design side of things, it's not enough to say, here are the primary colors for our website or our mobile apps. It needs to explain why these colors were chosen, why this design flow and this user experience flow was picked. What problems are you trying to solve? That's what documentation is about. Documentation is not about, this variable does this and that function call does that. It's about explaining the decisions that you picked to get to the solution. Testing, again, like I said, is a long quote, but it's worth the read. You're not just testing code. You're not just writing unit tests. You're actually testing your product. You're validating your solution. As a designer, you have a number of ways to test that. You have focus groups. You have feedback loops that you can actually start. As a product designer, you do the same thing. You also like actually go out and do shadowing of actual people using your product. As a developer, of course, you do unit testing, you do regression, you do a whole lot of testing, too many testings. But at the end of the day, your purpose of testing goes back to the purpose of quality. You're doing that so you can assure that you have a good quality product. It's not just to make sure your code works. It's not just, you don't want to just test to say your website to see that it actually, people can actually read it. No, people should enjoy it. There's a big difference there. And again, you see that theme being recurring in open source projects and teams around the world, is that everybody focuses on the user experience, everybody focuses on the end result. And they do and use these mechanisms to get to the perfect result that they're trying to reach. Discussion, an open discussion. There's a key aspect to that, and I don't know if any of you have seen some of the big fights that happen open source. There's a lot of passion behind it. Sometimes people get aggressive. Sometimes people actually fight about things, trivial things that you shouldn't think they should be fighting about, like syntax and whether you should put a semicolon at the end of JavaScript lines or not. I say no, but we can fight about that later. The reality is, all that passion is acknowledged. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind in the open source world. When you go to GitHub and trying to contribute to a project, you have a very passionate opinion about what you're trying to do. People appreciate that you have that passion. They know that you're coming from a good place. Sometimes they argue with you, and sometimes they disagree, and sometimes they fight you. But if you're presenting your argument in a good way, if you're providing the tests, if you're providing the documentation, if you're trying to target the quality of what you're advocating for, then people are more receptive. It ends up being a discussion as opposed to a disagreement. In the workplace, that's also true, of course. A lot of times you have an opinion, you want to discuss things, you want to build things differently as a product or as a developer or as a designer, and people will disagree. But if you come at it with the same tools in your pocket, talking about the quality first, why do you want to do this? Not because I like the syntax better than that syntax. If I'm going to have a conversation with my team about semicolons in JavaScript, it's not going to be about my choice of style. It better have some actual value to the team and make the product quality better. I'm going to document everything related to that, not just link them to an article or two talking about that. I'm going to document my use case. I'm going to document why this makes sense. And then with tests, provide actual runnable tests, whether it's from a design perspective, whether it's actual people's feedback and consumer feedback, or from a developer perspective, it's actual unit tests that you can run and validate your theorem. You provide those tests, and then you can have a good discussion. And part of having a good discussion is accepting criticism, especially when you're online. There's a lot of trolls. There's a lot of people who just are going to be passionate but not as articulate. There's going to be a lot of people who have strong opinions and are unwilling to change. So you're going to be able to accept criticism and provide criticism at the same time. Now, the way you deliver it is important, of course. You got to be nice. You got to be logical, and you got to be equipped with the right tools. And people will accept your criticism. If you're just being a bully and telling people, no, this is just a better way and you got to deal with it, and I got better experience than you, you're not going to go far. So the same experience you can take from online interactions and apply that to the workplace as well. And like I said, transparency is important for many reasons because of all of the above. If you're providing a documentation and providing the reasoning for why you chose a solution over the other, then be transparent about it, especially when it comes to clients. And this is something that boggles my mind. A lot of time when you're doing like client work as opposed to building your own product, you kind of try to keep things secret. You hide things away. You're like, yeah, no, the client doesn't need to know about how complex this thing is. The client doesn't need to know that this is actually a fragile piece of the software. The client doesn't need to know about this. No. The client needs to know because the client is paying for this thing and it's their product and they love it as much as you do, probably even more because they really want it, right? So at least that should be the principle that you come in to the conversation with, that the client is actually part of it. So being transparent about the challenges that you have, about the limitations that the product might have, about the choices you're making, actually brings the client to the table as actual part of the team as opposed to this other entity that may or may not be as involved. So what's the result of that? The result of that is, even if the client is not technical, even if the client is not design-oriented, even if the client has no experience in user flows and product design, they get to appreciate and they get to see your struggle day to day. If they're actually part of everything, everything is open to them. They get to see your struggle as a developer. They get to see your struggle as a designer. They get to see your struggle as a product designer trying to create a good user experience. And they get to appreciate that. They may be learning stuff from you that they've never seen before, as opposed to just meeting with your client once a month or at the end of the week and saying, this is the status. You got 5 more days left, and this is the scope we're delivering, and talking about labels on issues as opposed to the actual work involved. Sure, they care about the timelines. Sure, they care about the delivery. But I guarantee you they care most about the user experience, and they care most about the quality of the project. So if you actually start with those tenets in mind, come at them from, here's the quality, here's the reasoning, the documentation of what we're doing and how we're doing it, here's the test to validate our theories, and here's the discussion that we've had around these theories. Having that open and transparent to your clients actually makes your client on your side, championing you to do things better rather than just pressuring you on time and delivery. Just to go back to my point about the synchronicity is, it also, let's talk about clients. It also works for clients. If you're trying to build a project for somebody else, that person is not going to always be there to validate your decisions and tell you that what your choices are good or bad or are going in the right way or not. So again, if you come at it with quality in mind, with documentation and testing and full transparency about what you've been doing so far, and present them with your solutions, they don't need that whole, oh yeah, we need to get together, send your project management team, let's sit down for an hour or two and go through everything. No, if they're part of the conversation, if they're part of everything and they see everything in front of them, that makes that conversation better. So you can actually do things synchronously so that you don't actually have to have people in the same space, in the same room, on the same time zone to actually get answers. I'm not trying to affect US democracy, but I like this quote from Bernie Sanders. Who's American here? I got a couple folks. There you go. I don't know who you're voting for. That's up to you. But I appreciate the quote from him in the context of the US politics. Democracy is really tied to money in a lot of ways. We had a good conversation about that last night. But in project work and in software development shops and teams, you don't really get a lot of democracy when you have the development manager making decisions. You don't really get a lot of democracy when you have your engineering manager or your business manager or your project manager or product manager, whatever, anything with the manager suffix, making decisions for you. That's not democracy. And the reality is, in a lot of methodologies, in a lot of mindsets and processes, yeah, they evaluate the feedback of the team. They have a lot of feedback cycles that you can use and actually get more insight from the team. But they still go back into a closed door and make a decision. That's not really democracy. Sure, they're taking your feedback in. They have a good relationship with developers. They have a good relationship with designers. But if those people who are actually building the products not making decisions on the product, that's just not democracy. And at the end of it, there's an adverse effect to all of it. So if we go back up the list, if I'm not able to make decisions on the product that I believe the product needs to have for the purpose of quality, for the purpose of good documentation, for the purpose of delivering some things in a transparent way, then why should I bother? Right? It's going to affect the quality. People who are working on a project, if they don't have a say in it, they're not really going to care about the quality anymore. If they don't have a say into the decision process of product, they're not going to really care to be as good in testing the product and validating the theories of the solution. They're not really going to spend as much time documenting things. And they're really not going to be as transparent anymore because what's the point? If you don't hear what I have to say and if you don't take it into account, why should I be transparent about why I'm doing things in a certain way or not doing things in a certain way? So it really affects the morale of your team. It affects your ability to deliver that quality that you're all seeking. So this is not a process that I'm putting together. This is not a methodology or placement thing that I'm putting together. Sure, I'm calling it the open development methodology, but it's more of like core principles and tenets that you can actually follow and consider in your project flow. I'm not saying, don't use Scrum today and go do this now instead. It doesn't quite work that way. You still have to have some method and some, task management flow or some method of tracking your work and figuring out how to get things done. But taking into consideration those core tenets of quality, testing, documentation, transparency, discussion, and democracy changes the way you interact, changes the way you actually deliver those products and actually work together as a team. And this is still evolving. Like, I'm actually doing this as an open source project. So I actually put up a website and a GitHub repos that I want people's feedback on. I want to have those conversations. I want to learn from you as much as I want to share some of the learnings I've had. Not everything fits together in the same shoes. People have different experiences. People have different ideas about how to deliver software. Let's have an open conversation about this, as opposed to the example of the Agile manifesto. A couple of guys got together back in the 90s or whatever in a closed room and decided this is the way things should be done. No, I think the open community around the world has a lot of feedback and a lot of power to get together and actually decide how things get done, especially in today's world and the gig economy that we live in this new culture of development and software that we live in. Things are rapidly changing, so should the way our development methodologies be. They should also be rapidly changing and evolving as we go along. And remember, at the end of the day, we just want to get shit done. That's really what everybody wants to do. You want to deliver a good quality product, and you want to get it done, and you want to be able to ship it. That's it. I'm inviting everybody to collaborate. There's an article on opensource.com about this as well that I published. And if you go to the website, there's the links to the GitHub discussion and everything, and I'm making everything open. So anybody who wants to come in and make any comment or discussion or feedback, appreciate it. If you want to change the wording on something or make some adjustment, make a pull request. We'll accept it. It's an open discussion. It's an open conversation. And the purpose is, again, to evolve the way we're doing things and take into consideration the way we actually get things done, as opposed to the way business or the mindset of the assembly line wants us to get things done. At the end of the day, a lot of the metaphors, a lot of the terminology that we use in the software industry come from other industries. They come from the construction industry, from the manufacturing industry. This idea of an assembly line where things start at a certain point and end in a certain point doesn't actually translate well to software. Software is a creative process. Development is a creative process. Design is a creative process, of course. User experience and product design is a creative process. You shouldn't expect those to be as constrained by steps A, B, and C as you shouldn't expect an artist to paint a picture. You can't go to Da Vinci and say, all right, you got 3 weeks. I want by the end of the third day trees in the background, and by the 5th day I want the house in the forefront. Don't worry about the roof. We can get to that later after the third iteration. And yeah, by the end of the 3 weeks, they should have the product shipped and ready to go into the church or whatever it is that we're trying to do. You just don't get that. That makes no sense. In the same way with product and software development, it's a creative process. There is no expectation of steps that are predetermined and pre-designed that you can just follow and arrive at the end product that you all imagine. And that's why I'm starting this conversation so we can actually have more ways and more different approaches to solving problems, especially in the software development world, and take that into consideration as our methodology for the future. Thank you.